He was never the type to romanticize the unknown. A lifelong skeptic, a criminal homicide detective for 3 decades and a master of forensic science, he spent his career demanding evidence and distrusting stories that couldn't be checked. Yet the subject he avoided most was his own death. Even thinking about it could trigger a panic attack. He is 70 now, living just outside Pensacola, Florida. In March 2020, everything collapsed at once. A sudden, severe case of COVID sent him to the hospital. Within 24 hours, he was on a ventilator. Just over 24 hours later, he maxed it out and went into acute respiratory failure. He was flown by helicopter to a larger facility, underwent 1 surgery, and was placed on ECMO, a heart-lung bypass machine. His kidneys failed, and he went on dialysis. His liver enlarged and threw clots, and multiple organs were affected. His family was told the odds were around 3%. He spent 6 weeks in the hospital, 4 of them in a coma. During that coma, he moved through a series of clear, distinct experiences he still cannot place in exact order. When he finally woke up, he was not the same man. Calmer, more open, less driven by the old hardness of a Type A investigator. More importantly, he carried back a specific message connected to a person he did not know, something that could be checked in ordinary life and later was. In this story, there are no theories offered and no doctrine to defend, only the chronology of what happened to a skeptical investigator at the edge of life and what he brought back, verifiable details tied to a stranger, later confirmed in ordinary life. Before the illness, nothing about him suggested a taste for mysteries. He describes himself as a skeptic who never settled into a religious framework, and death was the one topic that could unnerve him instantly. Thoughts about his own end triggered panic, a private weakness that contrasted with a public career built on composure. 30 years as a criminal homicide detective, trained to gather facts, build cases, and trust only what could be verified. He also held a master's degree in forensic science. By the time the pandemic reached him, he was living just outside Pensacola, Florida, and still carried that investigator's instinct into everyday life. In March 2020, he fell ill. The decline was fast. After 24 hours in the hospital, he was intubated and placed on a ventilator. A little more than a day later, his condition worsened to acute respiratory failure, and the ventilator could no longer compensate. He was loaded onto a helicopter and flown to a larger hospital in Pensacola. There, he underwent a procedure and was connected to ECMO, which he understood as a heart-lung bypass, keeping him alive while his lungs could not. Within hours, another crisis arrived. His kidneys failed, and he was started on dialysis. His liver enlarged and began throwing blood clots. In short order, all the major systems of his body were implicated. The picture presented to his family was grim, roughly a 3% chance of survival, and instructions to prepare for the worst. The dates are precise because he remembers them as markers. He was admitted on March 26, 2020, and discharged on May 9, 2020. That span covers about 6 weeks in the hospital, approximately 4 of them in a coma. Machines took over the essential work of moving oxygen, filtering blood, and buying time. Somewhere inside that artificial stillness, as sedatives narrowed the ordinary field of awareness, a different kind of timeline began for him. Vivid scenes that arrived with the clarity of waking life, but without the usual sense of sequence. He cannot say which came first or last. He only knows they unfolded while his body lay motionless, and that, on waking, he remembered them in detail. What matters for this chapter is the boundary he reached before those scenes began. It is the line where the body is sustained by devices, and the odds of returning are minimal. He had crossed from the familiar world of monitors, ventilator settings, lab values, and transports into a condition where the medical record holds steady but something else continues. The external story is linear and clinical: a helicopter transfer, a surgery, ECMO, dialysis, multi-organ involvement, a prognosis that left little room for optimism. The internal story is harder to map, but anchored in dates and duration. About 6 weeks hospitalized, about 4 weeks without ordinary consciousness, with experiences that would later reshape the way he looked at everything he once feared. When he later tried to reconstruct the chain of events, he kept the 2 tracks separate. On one side is the verified chronology that any family member or chart could confirm. On the other side are the experiences themselves, which he refuses to force into a neat order he does not actually remember. That restraint is consistent with the man he had been for decades. He does not claim interpretations he cannot support. He simply reports what happened to him as he came as close to death as a person can and still return. The crisis laid out above is the frame. The moments that followed, while his body was sustained by machines and his awareness moved elsewhere, began at that boundary and will be described exactly as he recalls them, without embellishment and without theories attached. What came next felt like crossing a threshold. He found himself moving through a tunnel, dark inside yet wrapped in a brilliance that seemed to cling to its exterior without spilling inward. The light stayed outside, as if the passage itself were lined with radiance that could not penetrate. He was not rushing. The motion was steady, and with it came a calm that surprised him. Fear receded, replaced by an unmistakable awareness that his life on Earth had ended. He recognized it clearly, and even caught himself wondering where he was being taken. The scene shifted, and he was no longer in motion. He was standing inside a vast, beautiful space, looking down from a mezzanine level into a beautiful gold room. Gold dominated the architecture. 3 tall arches along one wall, 3 along the opposite, each crowned with stained glass that caught and held color. From the ceiling hung large chandeliers. There were water features as well, details that conveyed movement and serenity at the same time. The place did not resemble anything he could name, yet it was immediately coherent, with proportions that felt both grand and welcoming. The effect on his body and mind was profound. Warmth, peace, a sense of being loved. An olive-skinned man with dark hair and a beard approached, gliding more than walking, wearing a simple brown robe. The interaction was brief but decisive. The man conveyed that this was among the most frequented places here and, just as clearly, that the visitor standing on the mezzanine did not belong in it. He indicated the way out, large hand-carved oak doors. Passing through them, the detective felt he was not alone. Someone, he could not say who, seemed to be accompanying or guiding him. On the other side, the architecture opened into a city, and everything gleamed. Buildings rose as high as he could see, their surfaces golden, their windows opaque in a way that softened the light. The streets were unlike any he had known, made of a clear, almost glass-like material that was somehow also opaque, a paradox that made sense only while he was there. No vehicles moved through them. He drifted along those ways past parks that looked immaculately tended. The grass was a saturated green that outdid the highlands he had admired in Scotland and Ireland. In the distance, children played. The whole scene was orderly and clean and alive. The calm did not last. At some point he realized he had lost his way. Familiar cues were missing, and the sense of being guided was gone. Cold settled in. Anxiety rose fast. He sat down on a curb beside the strange, clear street and began to cry. The reaction of a man who suddenly understands he has no path back. He felt people moving back and forth but couldn't see them, and he couldn't draw anyone's attention. He called for help and nothing answered. Then, looking over his shoulder, he saw a staircase, white, straight, and impossibly long, rising into the clouds until it disappeared. The sight was both promise and instruction. If he could get to it, perhaps someone would find him. He made his way toward the steps and began to climb. The sensation was not graceful. It felt like crawling, as if each upward motion cost effort. He could not say how far he went. The measure of floors or flights had no meaning there. The rescue, when it came, was abrupt. Voices, not near but not distant either, called his name with urgency, telling someone to get him. A force seized him by the back of the neck, exactly the way his body understood a sudden extraction, and pulled him off the staircase. In the same instant, everything vanished. The gold, the streets, the parks, the cold, the fear, the steps into cloud. Gone. He was back in the blackness, back in his dark, sedated world. That entire sequence persists for him in the same way ordinary memories do. Places, colors, proximities, and feelings that remain steady across retellings. Inside the tunnel he moved slowly, wrapped by an external brilliance. Inside the golden room he looked down from a mezzanine at arches, stained glass, chandeliers, and water features. A robed man directed him away through carved oak doors. In the city the buildings climbed into the sky. The streets were clear and vehicle-free. The parks were impossibly green. Children played in the distance. He lost his way, felt frightened and cold, and sat on a curb. He saw a white staircase into the clouds, climbed, heard people call out his name, and was pulled out in an instant. He does not assign sequence beyond what he recalls, and he does not attach explanations. He simply keeps to the features as they were: the architecture of the places, the quality of the light, the physicality of getting lost, the relief and shock of being yanked back. The next scene opened into daylight. He found himself moving along a dirt path that felt soft and real underfoot. On both sides stood flowers and trees, the kind of careful beauty that looks tended yet effortless. Beyond them rolled wide meadows, grass stretching as far as he could see, and through those fields ran a stream or river that set the whole place in motion. The atmosphere matched what he had felt before, calm, warm, and safe. And he registered again, with the same clarity as in the tunnel, that he had died. The recognition did not frighten him, it simply framed what was happening. Without warning, a child appeared. A boy who looked about 10. His skin was olive, his hair dark and cut in a neat bowl with bangs, his feet bare. He wore three-quarter shorts, no shirt, and carried himself with quick, vivid energy. He waved his arms in invitation and told him to follow, then set off down the path. The detective followed, guided less by words than by the boy's bright insistence. They continued along the trail until the landscape opened into a building. Inside was another room unlike the Golden Hall, but just as striking in its own way. Large picture windows filled the walls, and around the room sat beautiful leather chairs. The boy led him in, told him to wait and that he would be back, and then left with the same animated certainty with which he had arrived. Left alone, he moved to one of the windows and looked out. The same river he had seen cutting through the meadow ran directly beneath the building, a clear line of water sliding under the floor and out the other side. Beyond the glass he saw people, human figures, not splashing or playing, but gathered along the banks as if the day itself were enough to occupy them. They seemed to be sitting, talking, being present. The scene was full of color. Flowers spread everywhere, in saturated reds, greens, oranges, and blues, the kind of palette that would look exaggerated anywhere else but felt normal here. He did not try to name the plants or analyze the layout. He simply watched. Time had no normal texture there. He cannot say how long he waited. The sense of minutes and hours did not apply. What remained constant were the details. The water passing under the building, the quiet arrangement of chairs, the figures by the riverbanks, the field of color that covered the ground. The emotional register held steady too. Peace, comfort, the felt presence of being cared for. He did not want to move. He did not want anything to change. Eventually the boy returned, the same child with the same brisk clarity. The message was firm. He had to leave. His room wasn't ready. The detective resisted at once, not belligerently but from the contentment he was experiencing. He wanted to remain in the room that looked out on the river and the flowers and the people by the banks. He wanted to stay where the calm felt complete. None of that altered the outcome. The instruction stood. It was time to leave. The transition back was immediate. The room, the chairs, the glass, the river running beneath the floor, the meadows and flowers beyond the window, everything dropped away in a single step. He was returned to the dark, sedated quiet he had described before. He did not carry with him any explanation for why the child had appeared, why the river ran under the building, or why people watched it from the banks. He held only the particulars of what he had seen and felt. A path lined with flowers and trees, meadows as far as sight, a stream or river through them, an animated boy who guided him to a room with picture windows and leather chairs, a view of the river flowing directly under the structure, people gathered calmly along the banks, a world saturated with red, green, orange, and blue, and the clear instruction to go because his own place was not finished. Then the dark again, and stillness. What followed did not feel like darkness in the usual sense. He came into a space that resembled late dusk, deep gray rather than black, where visibility was low but not gone, and where points of light drifted past like quiet traffic. Awareness felt expanded in every direction, as if he could register what was happening around him on all sides at once. One of the lights drew close, and without words he could quote later, made it clear he should come along. They moved deeper into the gray, and scenes began to appear the way a stage reveals actors. A patch of illumination would brighten somewhere ahead, shape would emerge inside it, and then the light would fade and the scene would be over. The first figure he recognized was his mother-in-law, Dolores. She sat upright and poised, projecting dignity. He noticed the specifics as a detective does. A white gown, a sash at the waist, hair gathered up, a white ribbon across the top, one hand settled on an armrest, and the other resting on a surface beside her. He called out in the way one does when relief meets surprise, hoping for acknowledgement. She looked in his direction briefly, then turned away. As the light that had revealed her dimmed, the impression was not of rejection so much as a rule being observed, and the moment closed. They continued. A young man ran past at speed, a relative who had died young, the brother-in-law he knew by recognition rather than introduction. The glimpse was quick, but the identification was immediate. Then another pooled brightness formed far off, and inside it he recognized his parents and his sister. They were distant, present enough to see him and for him to see them, but not inviting him closer. He sensed, accompanying their presence, a kind of moving boundary, a limit that kept him from crossing to them, and seemed to travel with him as he went farther into the gray. Later his children would put a word to that sensation. At the time he simply understood that a veil of some kind was in effect, and that he was not meant to pass through it. Amid these controlled appearances, one light behaved differently. It approached fast, stopped directly in front of him, and pressed a single identity so insistently that it became the only concept in the scene: veteran. The impression repeated on a loop, more like a stamped label than a spoken term. For an instant a face resolved out of the glow and delivered a task tied to a name and a place of work, a message meant for someone he had never met. The light then shifted to a short, vivid tableau. A white porch with someone present there, and the careful making of red, white, and blue ribbons alongside American flags. The images were specific enough to be checked later if an opportunity ever appeared. Shortly afterward, his guide indicated that this sequence too was complete, and the gray expanse became only movement again. The checkable part arrived after the coma. Back home, still recovering, he found himself going through a bedroom dresser without any clear reason. Among the odds and ends was a business card for a local barber shop he had visited a couple of times in the past, but not regularly. He asked his wife to call and see if the shop was operating under pandemic restrictions, and while he waited, his daughter, the nurse who had moved in to help with his care, came in and pressed him with questions about where the card had come from. He did not know. What he could see on it was the name of a stylist printed in the usual way: Madison Logan. That name matched the instruction he had been given. He asked for an appointment with her. The visit took place in May 2020. He arrived on a walker, and because of the restrictions at the time, staff let him inside, while others waited outdoors. In the chair, he proceeded the same way he might in an interview, gently establishing facts. He asked if both of her grandfathers were still living. She said the one she had been closest to had died less than a year earlier. The date placed it in June 2019. He asked if that grandfather had served in the military. She said he had served in the army and would talk about Vietnam. He asked whether the man had lived locally or ever visited their area. She said her family was from Iowa and that her grandfather had not had the chance to come down before he died. By then, the framework was set. He delivered the message he had been given, the one tied to her name and her workplace, and the atmosphere in the shop changed. Emotion overtook everyone directly involved, and other customers noticed without understanding why. He then tested the imagery that had come with the instruction. He asked if a white porch meant anything in connection with her grandfather. It did. That was his house in Iowa, and he liked to sit there speaking with people passing by. He asked about the ribbons and flags. That detail landed too. The family's connection with the American Legion, and the way they would make red, white, and blue ribbons and place flags for veterans' graves each year. None of this information had been accessible to him before the hospital, and the man in those images was a stranger. What he had was a name on a business card found unexpectedly in his own dresser. a chance to meet the person linked to that name, and a series of details that either matched or they didn't. They matched. For him, the significance was practical rather than theoretical. A message delivered by a figure associated with the word veteran corresponded to a real person at a real salon. Her closest grandfather had died in June 2019, had served in the U.S. Army, had a white port she favored, and belonged to a community that marked Veterans Day with ribbons and flags for graves. The geography also aligned with what he had been told in the chair. Iowa, not Florida. The man had never been to the place where the message was ultimately given. The detective's conclusion remained in the same register as his training. He had no prior access to these facts, and yet they were present in the sequence he experienced, and later verifiable in ordinary life. He does not frame what happened as a doctrine or a new philosophy. The investigator who once doubted now says only that something continues after death because he experienced it himself. That conviction did not come from reading or persuasion. It came in a form that matched his training. For 30 years he built cases by assembling verifiable details, and in the middle of his medical crisis he encountered a message that later proved checkable in ordinary life. For a man who always needed corroboration, that fit matters. He describes the result not as a change of opinion, but as a change of person. Family and friends notice it first. The edge has softened, the old intensity of a type A temperament has eased, and he meets people with more patience and care. He feels calmer and more accepting than before the illness. The panic that once rose at the thought of his own death no longer ruling the room. He uses a stark phrase to summarize it: illness as a kind of rescue, not because the disease spared him suffering, but because of what followed inside him afterward. He avoids arguing over names or systems. When he speaks of God, he does so in a way that leaves room for how others understand the divine. The point for him is not labels, but orientation. The core instruction that remained after the ventilators, the ECMO, the dialysis, the dates, and the scenes is disarmingly simple. The divine intention, as he now grasps it, is that people love one another. That is the line he carries back into ordinary days. It is not presented as a theory to defend, but as guidance received at the edge of life and tested by the way he now lives, with more openness, less hard judgment, and an attention to the small choices that express care. In the end, his testimony stays close to the ground. He was a skeptic. He faced a medical collapse with a 3% chance. He had experiences while his body lay unresponsive. One of those experiences produced information that later matched reality in precise ways. He came home different. If there is one practical takeaway, it is this: live with the understanding that our bonds matter, because beyond the machines and the charts, love is what he is convinced we are meant to practice. Dear friends, what would be convincing proof for you that consciousness continues to exist after death? Do you believe in life after death? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. By doing so, you'll be supporting my channel, which truly needs your help. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.